Alicia Monroe planned the most beautiful wedding Denver had ever seen. But by the time the sun rose, her groom Matthew Cross was missing, her ex-boyfriend Ryan Keller was dead, and Camille Hartley's body was lying in a drainage ditch because Alicia hadn't planned a wedding, she had planned a trap. Alicia Monroe had built her life around appearances. From the outside, she was the kind of woman people envied. Graceful, successful, always composed. At 28, she owned a boutique event planning company in Denver that catered to high-profile weddings and galas. She had thousands of followers online, a curated Instagram feed full of picture-perfect moments, and a seemingly flawless love story with her fiancé, Matthew Cross. Their engagement had gone viral after a photographer captured the exact moment Matthew proposed on a snow-covered mountain at sunset. Alicia's tearful smile, the ring glinting in the fading light, the applause of onlookers. It was the stuff of fairy tales. But behind Alicia's polished smile and pristine bridal post was a secret she couldn't let go of: Ryan Keller. He had been her first real love, and their relationship had once seemed unbreakable. They met in college and stayed together for 4 years. She had believed they would marry, that everything was heading toward that inevitable, happy ending. Then, without warning, Ryan ended it. He gave her vague excuses about not being ready for commitment, about needing space, and weeks later, she saw photos of him with another woman. The betrayal was sharp and humiliating. Alicia didn't cry in public, and she didn't beg him to come back. Instead, she turned the heartbreak into fuel, building a life that looked perfect from every angle. But she never stopped watching him. Quietly, in the background, she tracked Ryan's life, who he dated, where he moved, how his relationship fared. She saw it all unravel 2 years later. The same woman he left her for had dumped him. That was when Alicia felt something shift. It wasn't closure she wanted. It was something deeper and darker: payback. When Alicia got engaged to Matthew, she began weaving a plan. She didn't want just a wedding. She wanted a stage, and Ryan would be part of the audience. The idea started small. She would invite him and act gracious, show him how happy she was without him. But over the months of planning, the idea took on a life of its own. She designed every detail of the wedding to revolve around image and impact. The venue was an exclusive lakeside estate. The dress was custom-made by a French designer. The flower arrangements had to be symmetrical and bold. But more importantly, the guest list had to include Ryan Keller. It took effort to track him down. They hadn't spoken in years, and he had moved out of state. She sent a carefully worded message, polite, warm, forgiving. She told him she was marrying someone wonderful, and that she would be honored if he attended, for old times' sake. She acted like she had no hard feelings, that her life had moved on. Ryan replied days later, saying he'd consider it. Weeks passed, and Alicia received the RSVP. He was coming. Not alone, either. He was bringing someone named Camille. The news sent a jolt through her. Alicia didn't recognize the name, and the woman had no online presence. But it didn't matter. She would still go through with it. The wedding day would be perfect. The ceremony, the toasts, the photos, everything would be staged to show him what he had lost. Matthew, sweet and trusting, had no idea about any of it. He believed Alicia was deeply in love with him, and to some degree, she was. But her heart had been shaped by something colder: bitterness that never healed, memories that wouldn't fade. The wedding was only weeks away. Alicia walked through rehearsals, tastings, and fittings with flawless focus. Every smile she practiced in the mirror. Every moment was orchestrated. No one knew the truth, that this wedding wasn't just the start of a marriage. For Alicia, it was the final act of a story she had been rewriting in her head for years. One way or another, Ryan Keller was going to remember her. The morning of the wedding began with a calm sky and sunlight pouring over the hills surrounding the estate. Everything was unfolding exactly as Alicia had planned. The private lakeside venue was dressed in white orchids and pale pink roses. Tables were set with crystal glassware and gold accents, and the string quartet began their early rehearsals in the garden. Alicia's team, her trusted assistants and florists, bustled around the grounds, making final adjustments. To the guests arriving from across the country, it was a dream setting for a fairy tale celebration. But beneath the perfection, a carefully controlled tension simmered, visible only to Alicia. She spent the morning in the bridal suite, surrounded by bridesmaids sipping champagne and laughing over old memories. Hairdressers pinned back her dark curls. Makeup artists perfected her already flawless complexion. Everyone commented on how calm she seemed, how she radiated confidence. But inside, Alicia's thoughts weren't on Matthew or their vows. Her mind was on Ryan. She knew he was arriving that afternoon, and she had made sure he and his guest, Camille, were seated at the front near the dance floor, directly in view of the head table. There would be no escaping the spotlight. Guests began, arriving just before sunset. Matthew stood under the floral arch, smiling nervously, greeting old college friends and distant cousins. Alicia walked down the aisle to soft music, a vision in white, as hundreds of eyes followed her graceful steps. She didn't miss the brief flicker of Ryan's expression when he saw her. He didn't smile. Camille, standing beside him, remained unreadable. Alicia locked eyes with them for just a second before turning toward Matthew and placing her hands in his. The ceremony was short, beautiful, and deeply moving for everyone but Alicia. After the ceremony, drinks flowed freely. Waiters carried silver trays of hors d'oeuvres, and laughter rose above the string music. Alicia floated from guest to guest like a seasoned performer. Her eyes kept drifting toward Ryan and Camille. He was clearly uncomfortable, barely speaking to anyone. Camille stayed close to him, but never once made eye contact with Alicia. The photographer captured dozens of pictures of Alicia and Matthew, kissing, dancing, cutting the cake. But Alicia knew exactly where to stand each time, ensuring Ryan was within sight. The slideshow began during dinner. It was a montage of Alicia's life, childhood photos, family memories, vacations with Matthew. Then, seemingly by accident, a few photos of her and Ryan appeared. One at the beach, one hiking in the Rockies, one on his birthday. Guests murmured in confusion, but Alicia brushed it off as a technical glitch. She knew Ryan understood. Every frame was a message. As the night wore on, the energy shifted. Many guests began leaving after the speeches. Only a smaller group stayed. For the after-party by the lake, music played from portable speakers, and lanterns flickered across the shoreline. Ryan and Camille lingered on the edge of the crowd, speaking in hushed tones. Alicia noticed Matthew slip away from the party. She assumed he needed a break. He wasn't good with crowds, and she didn't worry. She stayed behind to ensure the party kept going. Her smile unwavering teed around 1 a.m. Guests noticed Ryan and Camille had disappeared. Moments later, Alicia was seen heading toward the lake. Witnesses later said she looked different, quiet, more serious, as if something had changed. Some assumed she was going to find Matthew. No one suspected anything strange. It was her wedding night. After all by dawn, the estate was quiet again. The staff began cleaning up. The decorations were packed into boxes, the cake mostly eaten, the champagne bottles emptied. No one realized yet that 3 people had vanished into the night. What had started as a celebration was now the beginning of a mystery no one could explain. The sun rose over the estate, casting long shadows across the dew-covered grass. Staff moved silently through the grounds, cleaning up the remnants of what had appeared to be a flawless wedding. Empty glasses were gathered, candles snuffed out, flower petals swept from the stone paths. But as the hours passed, concern began to ripple through the estate. Matthew Cross, the groom, had not been seen since the after-party. At first, everyone assumed he had gone somewhere to rest after the long day. Maybe he had taken a walk or slipped away early. But by mid-morning, his absence became impossible to ignore. Alicia told staff that Matthew had gone to get some air near the lake after they'd had a small disagreement. She said he'd been overwhelmed by the attention and wanted a moment alone. But the estate's security team began to worry. They checked the bridal suite, the guest rooms, the grounds. No sign of him. His phone was found on the bench by the dock, locked, its screen smeared with moisture. His tuxedo jacket was neatly folded beside it, as if he had sat there for a while. Alicia appeared shaken but tried to maintain composure. She told the police she had no idea where he had gone, that maybe he'd gone for a swim and something had gone wrong. As search crews arrived and began combing the area, another troubling discovery surfaced. Ryan Keller's rental car was still parked in the estate's lot. He hadn't checked out of his hotel. His phone went straight to voicemail. No one had seen him or Camille since the early morning hours. Alicia acted surprised, insisting she hadn't noticed their disappearance. But others started whispering. Some remembered seeing Ryan, Alicia, and Matthew in the same area near the lake around the same time. Some recalled Camille looking tense, almost afraid. Others mentioned how strange it was that the wedding slideshow had shown photos of Alicia and Ryan together. Things that had seemed like innocent oddities at the time now felt deeply suspicious. The estate had security cameras positioned throughout the main venue, the gardens, and the entrance road. When police reviewed the footage, they saw Matthew leaving the party alone at 1:12 a.m., heading toward the lake. 3 minutes later, Ryan and Camille were seen walking in the same direction. Then, shortly afterward, Alicia appeared on camera moving through the hallway toward the lake path. But just beyond the boathouse, where the path curves toward the dock, the footage abruptly ended. The last camera in that area had been disconnected, wires torn out and hanging loosely from a tree branch. It looked intentional, with no bodies, no signs of a struggle, and 3 people missing. Investigators expanded their search. Divers were brought in to scan the lake. K-9 units combed the surrounding woods. Rumors spread quickly. Some guests suggested a love triangle gone wrong. Others whispered about Alicia's strange obsession with her ex. People began digging through Alicia's social media posts, noticing subtle but telling signs. Captions that mentioned fate. Hashtags like #NeverForget and #FullCircle. Photos from years ago reposted in the days leading up to the wedding. Every detail was being re-examined through a new, chilling lens. By the end of the 3rd day, the case had gone from a missing person alert to a full criminal investigation. What had once been hailed as the wedding of the year was now a crime scene. The estate was sealed off, guests were interviewed again, and forensic teams began processing everything from the dock to the trash bins. Alicia stayed close to her family, rarely speaking to reporters, always appearing composed. But something in her eyes had changed. What had started as a celebration of love now carried the unmistakable weight of something much darker. And the truth, still hidden beneath layers of glitter and silk, was beginning to claw its way to the surface. On the 4th day of the search, divers returned to the lake with sonar equipment, sweeping the dark waters in a grid pattern. The lake was wide but not especially deep, and murky silt had settled at the bottom from years of stillness. Just after noon, a diver surfaced, signaling frantically. A body had been located near the far end of the lake, partially entangled in weeds, weighed down by something heavy. Recovery crews moved quickly. When the body was pulled to shore, covered in a black tarp, Alicia stood at a distance, motionless. The victim was Ryan Keller. He had been tied to an anchor used for the estate's small rowboats. A forensic team confirmed blunt force trauma to the back of his skull and defensive wounds on his hands. There were marks on his wrists consistent with being restrained. It wasn't an accident. He had been attacked, bound, and left to sink. The discovery turned the case from a missing persons investigation into a confirmed homicide. But there was still no sign of Matthew or Camille. Later that afternoon, another search team found something unusual in the reeds near the inlet at the edge of the property. A single heel, soaked and torn, wedged between the rocks. It matched the shoes Camille had worn that night. Not far from that spot, a second team found a trail of dried blood leading from the trees to the drainage system that ran beneath the estate. Deep inside one of the storm drains, they found Camille's body. She had been stabbed multiple times. Her phone was discovered nearby. Its screen shattered, the battery pulled out. Under her fingernails were skin cells and traces of male DNA. The evidence stunned investigators. 2 of the 3 missing persons were now confirmed dead. Only Matthew remained unaccounted for. But then came another twist. The DNA beneath Camille's fingernails came back with a match, Matthew Cross. At first glance, it painted a damning picture. Did Matthew attack Camille in a fit of rage? Was he somehow involved in both deaths? As investigators dug deeper, the timeline began to shift. A shattered champagne bottle, stained with blood, was found near the edge of the woods. Surveillance from earlier that night showed Alicia carrying a similar bottle during the reception. Forensic tests revealed that the blood on the glass matched Matthew's. Now everything turned. Alicia had told police that Matthew left after a small argument, but that story no longer held. Blood had been found in the storage closet of the boathouse, smeared along the floor and streaked toward the dock. Nearby, hidden under leaves, police discovered a black backpack containing plastic gloves, zip ties, and a roll of duct tape. Some of the tape had traces of Ryan's skin and body hair. Investigators began piecing together what really happened. The sequence suggested a chaotic confrontation near the lake involving all 4 individuals. Camille may have tried to protect Ryan and was fatally stabbed in the process. Matthew likely intervened and was struck with the champagne bottle. His blood trail suggested he was injured and possibly unconscious when he disappeared. Divers resumed their search point 3 days later. They found his body in the weeds near the shallow end of the lake, weighed down with stones tied to his belt. Unlike Ryan, he wasn't bound. His death appeared to be secondary, less planned, more desperate. A blow to the back of the head had left a fracture. He had drowned soon after. His wedding band was still on his hand. The narrative had changed completely. Alicia was no longer a grieving bride. She was now the only living person directly connected to 3 deaths. As the estate emptied of search crews and forensic teams packed their equipment, police moved in. Alicia was arrested quietly at her family's home. There were no tears, no protests, just a calm, rehearsed silence. The woman who had once choreographed the perfect wedding had instead orchestrated a night of violence, revenge, and death. The courtroom was packed as Alicia Monroe's trial began 6 months after her wedding turned crime scene. Reporters filled the benches, cameras waited outside, and the public followed every update as the woman once admired for her elegance and poise was now painted as a calculating killer. The prosecution laid out a story not of passion or momentary rage, but of premeditated revenge, coldly carried out during what was supposed to be the happiest night of her life. Alicia had used her wedding not to celebrate love, but to lure her ex-boyfriend into a carefully designed trap, one that ended with 3 bodies and a shattered community. Investigators had compiled a mountain of evidence. Internet searches from Alicia's home revealed disturbing keywords: how to make someone unconscious fast, best places to hide a body in water, how long does it take to drown. She had used a burner email account to rent the anchor used to sink Ryan's body and purchased the duct tape, gloves, and zip ties weeks before the wedding. The champagne bottle she used to strike Matthew had traces of her DNA on the neck and fingerprints along the base. Surveillance logs showed that she had entered the boathouse alone just before Ryan and Camille arrived at the dock. Her phone's GPS pinged at the far side of the lake shortly after. Her digital trail matched the movements of every victim that night. What stunned jurors most, however, was Alicia's journal, discovered in a locked drawer at her office. Pages of neat handwriting revealed deep resentment toward Ryan and a burning obsession with the idea of restoration through pain. She had written multiple hypothetical scenarios, some including violence, others involving humiliation. In one chilling entry dated 3 months before the wedding, she described a plan to bury the past in water where no one can see the damage. Prosecutors argued that the wedding had been a performance staged for one audience, Ryan Keller, and when things didn't unfold as she'd envisioned, she spiraled beyond control, but Alicia's defense team claimed otherwise. They argued that Ryan had attacked Matthew after a drunken confrontation and that Alicia had panicked while trying to protect herself and Camille. They suggested Camille's death had been accidental and that Matthew's death was a result of a struggle. But the timeline, the hidden items, and the overwhelming digital and physical evidence worked against her. Forensic experts testified that Camille's wounds were not consistent with accidental stabbing. Matthew's injuries suggested he had been struck from behind, not in a face-to-face fight. The jury listened, but the picture being painted was increasingly clear. This was not self-defense. After 2 weeks of testimony, the trial concluded. Alicia sat expressionless as the verdict was read. Guilty on all counts. 3 charges of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There was no reaction from her. No final plea. No apology. Just the same detached silence she had shown since the morning Matthew disappeared. In the aftermath, the story of Alicia Monroe gripped the nation. True crime documentaries, podcasts, and television specials examined her every move. How someone so composed, so seemingly successful, could carry out such a violent plan became the central question.